So hello everybody, it's really good to see you today. My name's Suzanne Ross and I'm going to be the host for this session. So today we're going to be talking about building resilience as an employee, and this is sponsored by jobs.ac.uk, which is an international job site supporting those people who are in higher education. So my name is Dr Suzanne Ross and I'm a senior lecturer in executive education at Nottingham Business School, which is part of Nottingham Trent University. And my background is in leadership development and organisational behaviour. And about 6 years ago now, I took a mammoth journey to complete a doctorate in leadership talent, success and derailment. And as part of that doctorate, what was really becoming obvious was the importance in resilience to support leaders in developing their careers. And during that time, completing the doctorate, and since then, I've spent a lot of my time working with leaders to help them to build their resilience. As well as a senior lecturer at the business school, I also have my own business, To Thrive Consultancy, and spend a lot of time coaching managers and leaders. I'm a member of the Working with Resilience Global Consortium and accredited in the Working with Resilience Toolkit that helps people to think about their own resilience and the strategies that they could put in place to help them to develop that. Nottingham Business School has a relationship with FutureLearn, which is a digital learning platform. And as part of that relationship, I developed a short course, which is free short course on leader resilience, and also a micro credential, helping people to develop their resilience. So a lot of work coaching, supporting people, especially during COVID, to build that kind of capability to be resilient depending on and regardless of what life is throwing at us. So I'm going to spend about half an hour or so just really setting the scene and the context to what we mean by resilience, how we can really develop our resilience during what are at the moment some quite challenging times. Before the session, we canvassed you for questions, and so we got a lot of response to those to that plea. So what I've hopefully done is build in a lot of the questions that you had around how you can build your own resilience during particularly challenging times. So I'm going to start the presentation, and then hopefully afterwards we will have some time to take some questions. So if you want to drop in some questions at the Q&A button at the top of your screen, please feel free to do that. Hopefully we'll have time. If not, I can find some way to get some answers to you after the event. So what I've done is split this session into about 5 key areas that I kind of wanted to share with you today. The first is to really explore what it actually means to be resilient. What's our understanding of that, and why how we see or define resilience really matters. And then I'm going to spend quite a bit of time understanding our stressors. What is it that causes us to need to be resilient in the first place? And then the second part of the presentation, I'm going to talk around how we can put in place coping strategies to help us to be more resilient and gather resources to help us to adapt even during challenging times. I also want to leave a little bit of time at the end to reflect on how we might demonstrate resilience to hiring managers who are more and more asking for people to have this trait, this sort of characteristic. So that's the structure of the session today. So I want to start with this idea of what it actually means to be resilient. And unfortunately, it's become a little bit of a buzzword over the last few years, to the extent that sometimes if I ask people, put your hand up, who's really fed up with hearing this word resilience, a number of hands will kind of go up. And one of the reasons it's become a little bit of a challenge in how we talk about resilience is that in organisational life, the term's been kind of dumbed down a little bit to mean this idea of being able to bounce back. but it can be really difficult to think about how you bounce back when you're in the midst of some quite stressful situations or circumstances. My own desire to build my personal resilience came about 15 years ago when my husband at the time had been diagnosed terminally ill with cancer. My father had been diagnosed terminally ill with cancer. I'd got 3 small boys. I was in an international role and had just started a doctorate. And I think if someone had come along to me and said, well, actually, you just need to be a bit more resilient and bounce back, I don't think that conversation would have gone very well. So resilience is more than just bouncing back. Resilience is a response to adversity, to trauma and stress. And actually, research in resilience has been around for a long time. At the business school, I'm an active researcher in resilience and currently looking at resilience in high stakes environments. So, for example, emergency services, humanitarian work, for example. And some of that early research actually came from post-war years, and during those years, some of the early researchers in resilience were actually children at that time, and they were interested to understand how is it that some children can experience really adverse situations and still go on to achieve positive outcomes. And from then, from this sort of research into early years childhood trauma, resilience work research went into things like the military as a mitigator for post-traumatic stress. It went into emergency services, it went into critical care, really to understand what is it that people are demonstrating that help them to be resilient in these particularly challenging times. And then research found its way into elite sport and then into organisations, where it's become simplified a little bit, which is often not very helpful to us because really resilience is about this response to adversity, to trauma or stress, and it's a process. And if we can understand it as a process, then we can really start to think about how we develop our own resilience. So this process is about understanding, first of all, what is it that causes you to feel stress? And that's really going to be quite personal to you and your own situation and context. And then as a result of those things that are causing you stress, what are the strategies that you might put in place to help you? And what are the resources that you have around you that can really help you to adapt? So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, this idea of resilience as a response to an adversity or stressful environment, and a process, understanding resilience as this process. So because it's a process, if you will, the start point is understanding what is it that's causing you to feel stress in the first place, and to feel the need to be resilient in the first place, sorry. And that is going to be quite personal. So, you know, when we look at resilience in individuals, there should be no judgment there with regard to how people are reacting and responding to stressful situations. It's a very personalized thing. These things that might cause you stress might not cause someone else stress, and vice versa. So what we want to understand is what is the stressor causing you to need to be resilient in the first place? But we do know there are some things that can cause stress or anxiety or difficulties or challenge in the first place. Things like a single incident, trauma or adverse event. So a bereavement, divorce, a house move, a career shift. We know that these some big life events cause stress and anxiety. But we also know that opportunity can cause stress in an achievement and performance-oriented environment like sport or organisations or entrepreneurship. As we seek these opportunities, this career progression, that can cause stress and anxiety. And then we know prolonged stress over time can be particularly challenging. So, adverse financial circumstances, bullying, difficult relationships, prolonged stress over time can really impact our mental health and well-being. Now, the challenge can be that you might be experiencing one of those things, many of those different things, which is why it's very personal to individuals. So, in thinking about what are the things that are causing you stress in the first place, what we can start to do is understand risk factors, potential stressors. And I really encourage you to use that as the start point. What is it that's causing you stress in the first place? That's causing you to need to respond in a way that needs to kind of draw on that resilience. So we know there are some risk factors, some things that can really impact people's ability to feel resilient. There are some biological risk factors. For example, our predisposition to illness, our how we are, sort of in a situation where we might be prone to disease or a challenge with hormones. So there's some biological risk factors that might impact us. A link to that, physical risk factors, so aging, ill health, and accidents. And then there are some environmental risk factors. So that environment might be your own home and the stress that is within the home environment. Or within your community. So if you're in a community that is quite deprived, there's a challenge with access to resources, there's a high crime rate, for example. Or the wider environment, if you are in an environment where it's quite toxic, the culture is quite toxic, there's war, there's violence, so the environment becomes particularly important. And then there's behaviour, our own behaviour. Do we take risks? Are we engaged in, extreme sports? So do we put ourselves in harm's way such that there is potential for adversity? And then there's psychological risk factors that impact our mental health and well-being, dysfunctional relationships, bullying, for example, or our own tendency for lowered self-belief. So when we're trying to understand what is it that's causing somebody to feel stressed in the first place, or to feel anxious, or feel the need to demonstrate resilience, we're just really interested to understand these particular risk factors. So by understanding those risk factors, what we can start to do is better address the cause, not just our resilient response. We're really starting to address the cause of the stress in the first place. And when we learn to address or learn to understand what causes us stress in the first place, then we can start to build appropriate strategies. Resilience is a bit like building a muscle. We want to be building that resilience all the time so that when we are faced with difficulties, we can draw on these kind of reserves. So understanding what causes us stress is a huge part of that. And also, I just want to start to raise this here, and I'm going to come back to it later on in the presentation. But it's really important to recognize that organizations, leaders and managers should be seeking to reduce stress in the workplace rather than simply expecting employees to be more resilient. So the onus is on organisations to find ways to support employees rather than just rely on employees building their own resilience. So what do I kind of mean by this idea of cause and effect, and making sure that we are addressing the cause of the stress rather than simply focusing solely on our own resilience, our own response to that. So in this example, if we were to focus on resilience, and we've been focused on the little boy, we'll be looking at what are the strategies he or I put in place to help me cope. We'd be looking at what are the resources I or he have available to help, and how might I adapt if this were to happen going forward. So the focus is very much on the individual. What are the strategies? Well, this little boy might have some strategies in place that help him to stay calm during a difficult situation. And as a result of being able to stay calm, can sense check what's the injury, might have resources to help him, might have a mobile phone, ring a parent or carer to come and pick him and his bike up, take him home. And all of that might help him to adapt both in this situation and a situation going forward. Someone else might not quite have those coping strategies, might not be able to calm themselves, might not know anything about first aid, might not have a mobile phone, and might not have a carer or somebody who can come along and actually help them out. So first of all, we're looking at my own resilience in these sort of difficult and challenging situations. But in this instance, what we're also interested in is what caused this in the first place. Was it a defective bike? Was it poor signage? Was it an accident? Someone failed to stop? Was it deliberate? And how are all those things going to be addressed? And they're not necessarily going to be addressed by my own resilient response. Okay, there's somebody else, some other and the police, local authorities who need to be involved in ensuring this doesn't happen again. So what I'm trying to do here is to help you to think about how we separate out what's the cause of this. And that might not be my responsibility. That might be someone else has caused this. And what's my reaction and response, the bit I can control. So we know that work factors cause stress. And this was the basis of a lot of the questions that you had for us coming into the webinar. We know that things like long working hours cause stress. Particularly if that starts to impact sleep or work-life balance. Working patterns, so shift patterns, cause a lot of stress. Overload of work, working conditions, and then things like lack of autonomy, lack of control in your work, lack of management support, for example. Lack of clarity, particularly around priorities, can lead to stress. Lack of access to training and development, which impacts my ability to feel competent. Management and leadership styles. Some people have very supportive managers and some people less so. Change and the way change is implemented or managed can cause stress, and organisational culture. So many of the questions that were asked coming in were around those causes. So I'm playing back here some of the questions that we had and really just kind of superimposing this idea of known risk factors, things that we know can create a potential for stressful situations such that I need to be resilient. So one of the questions was around how do you maintain resilience after 50 years of age, for example. Now with this, there might be a biological or a physical component, a physical cause with regard to why I don't feel so resilient. So what is it about my age that's causing me to not feel as resilient? Is it to do with hormones? Is it to do with physical aging? Is it to do with menopause? Is there a health element to this such that I don't feel as healthy? So we want to address the cause of that. And so the cause of that, if the cause of that is about your health, that's about accessing the support of GPs. it's about education around healthy aging, it's about diet and exercise. So the first thing we want to do is to understand what's causing you to feel that you might not be as resilient after 50. Is there a physical or a component to that, a health component? And that's a good place to start, is to make sure that we're feeling fit and healthy. When we feel fit and healthy, we're more able to be resilient. Some of the questions related to the environment. So, for example, how do I manage children, parenting, and work, and organisational culture? They're about our environment. So, if we feel that it's the environment that's causing us stress, that's a great place to start. So, for example, in this scenario, how do I manage children, parenting, and work? How do I access more support, whether that's through partner support or my wider network? How do I have good conversations with my manager around, for example, flexible working or working from home, remote working? So that's where it's a good place to start. What's the cause? Perhaps the cause of all of these competing priorities. So how do I start to have good conversations with people about those different priorities? And then organizational culture, I'm going to drop that one down a little bit into psychological. So psychological risk factors. Interestingly, a lot of the questions that people had coming into this webinar related to what I would term psychological risk factors. So, for example, a hostile work environment, a manager who is difficult, unscrupulous, unprofessional, immature, an absence of good managers. You really painted a picture here of the impact that managers and leaders were having on your mental health and well-being. So if we start to think that that's the cause of our stress, is these particular individuals at work, then that's a great place to start. So where I would encourage people to start there is to think about, how do I widen my network? How do I enlist the support of allies? So it's not me against a particular manager. I've got a supportive network around me. How do I start reducing the amount of time I might spend in the presence of this individual until I can kind of regroup and build some good strategies? How do I enlist the support of HR? How do I enlist the support of managers and leaders who I know to be supportive of me? How do I build a reputation away from this individual for delivering value and delivering good work? Um, so do you see how I'm starting to encourage you to think about, let's begin with the cause. What's causing you to need to be resilient in the first place? And what are some of the strategies you could put in place to help you address that cause? Some of the other questions that you posed were around change. How do I help people struggling with change? How do I build resilience given the amount of change in the HE sector? How do I react to change that's coming from the government, and it's as a result of the HE's reaction and response to that? What steps do I take when change is happening to me at work? And again, we go to the cause. What's the cause of the stress? The cause of the stress is change. We know that change is a stressor. It impacts our mental health. It's linked to burnout, psychological strain, absenteeism. So if we feel that change is the stressor, we can separate it out. Is it the change itself? Is it the driver for change? There is a lot of change at the moment that's about downsizing, restructuring. It's not always a positive message. So is it the driver for change, or is it the way it's being implemented that I feel is impacting my sense of certainty, my competency, my social ties? Is it the change itself? How do I get comfortable with the change? How do I educate myself around the change? How do I have good conversations with my manager about what's going on in the organisation and what's going on for me? How do I contribute my voice to how the change could be enacted in the organisation? Or is it change alongside other factors, business as usual, that's causing you stress? If it's change alongside business as usual, how do I have good conversations with my manager around prioritization? Focus, what do I need to concentrate on first? So if we're identifying that actually it's change that's the stressor for me, then is it the change itself, or is it change alongside other factors? And then what are the things that I could start to put in place that would help me feel comfortable with the change? And a lot of that is around engaging our managers and leaders in good conversations. So alongside some of these stresses, it's also important for us to recognize that actually stress and the need to be resilient can be self-inflicted. Um, by that, I mean our own pursuit of success. So you might at the moment be pursuing a career move. You might be looking for a promotion. You might be looking for your next project. And that pursuit of success and achievement can actually come with stress. And often what we're doing is balancing the stress of going for a new role, going for a promotion, versus the reward that might come with that. The higher education environment is a very competitive and performance-oriented environment. Some roles especially are quite hierarchical. They're graded. We go through the ranks. And as we go through those ranks, the more senior roles, there's often greater competition for. So it is important to recognise that when we are putting ourselves out there for a promotion, for a career move, for a new project, when we're throwing our hat in the ring, in likelihood, we're going to increase the amount of kind of stress or pressure that we might put on ourselves. So I've spent a lot of time, half the time, talking now about really unpacking and unpicking the causes of stress. And that's a really important part of developing your resilience, because there you can recognize what's about you and what's about what other people might need to do to ensure that there's support and resources in place to help people. But now I want to focus on you as an individual, you and I. How can we develop our own resilience? Because life is going to throw curveballs, and no matter our expectations of our organisations, our managers and leaders to support us in life and work, we're going to have some things happen to us, and so it's really important that we think about how we can develop our own resilience to navigate those things. So I keep talking about a process, and it is a process. Resilience is a process, and coping is a process. And what it's a process of is, first of all, understanding the stressor. Now, I've changed this. This used to be a spider, but I really can't stand spiders. So I love snakes, so I've got a snake there. Okay, so we've got a stimulus, the stressor. We understand our stressor. The next thing is to understand our response to it. What is this triggering in me? This event, this thing, whether it's a snake, whether it's a manager, whether it's a leader, whether it's a colleague, what is this triggering in me? What's my response to that? And in a lot of people, it's a bit of a fight or flight response. How am I appraising this whole situation? And as a result of how am I praising this thing, what coping strategies am I putting in place? So there's a lot of attention in resilience to things like, positive thinking and optimism. But really what we're encouraging is how are you appraising this thing, this event, this individual, this kind of stressful situation? How are you appraising it? Um, and it's really helpful to lower stress levels and introduce calm by thinking about how am I interpreting this? What are the facts? What else could this be about? You raised a lot of questions that were around other people's behaviour. other people being toxic, being sort of aggressive, or create an environment that was really difficult. But it's really important to recognize when people are behaving that way, they are not in a happy place. And a lot of the behavior that you see is possibly about them, not you. Your role is to create a bit of a boundary around yourself such that that behavior doesn't start to impact you. And when we can start to think about actually it's about them, that difficult behavior is about them, not me, then I can start to think about, so what do I want to do about that to protect myself a little bit from that bad behavior? There's a really good book by Martin Seligman called Flourish, Authentic Happiness. He's also got a website where there's lots and lots of resources. And Martin Seligman talks about this idea of learned optimism. Um, we often talk about being glass half full, glass half empty, but optimism as a state. We can all learn to be a little bit more optimistic. And if we could see something as local, it's just this one thing, it's this difficult manager. Okay, it's just this. But at home, I've got a really good home life. I've got really good friends. I've got really good hobbies. I've got a quality home life. It's just this manager. So if we can reduce it, reduce the impact and see it as something that it's just about this bit, the rest is great. It's just this. It's temporary. It's not going to be forever. It's changeable. I can do something about it. And if we can perceive a situation that way, then what happens is we bring the temperature down, and we can bring a better sense of calm. When we have a sense of calm, we're better able to implement coping strategies. I encourage people to check out this quiz from Al Siebert. The link is here, because in just checking out this quiz, answering some of the questions, you can start to identify what are some of the strategies you could actually put in place, or do put in place and know how to put in place. So this asks you things like, can you calm yourself? Are you usually optimistic? Do you generally sleep well? And if the answer is yes, 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 fantastic. Do more of that. In resilience, what we're always trying to do is to do more of the good stuff, do more of the stuff that really helps us, and really helps us on a day-to-day basis to navigate challenge. So if there are things that you know you can do on a day-to-day basis, you're playful, you've got good friends, keep doing that. Keep retaining your sense of humor, seeing the fun in a situation, keep talking to friends, keep putting in place those strategies that help you calm. Keep doing that. So the yes mostly is your tip off to keep doing those things. Sometimes is a tip off to do it more. And then you're struggling with this, okay, maybe think about some of the strategies that you could put in place that might help you in those areas. But in resilience, the first thing we do is look at what are the things you can generally put in place that help you, and how can you keep doing those things. So some of the coping strategies I'm talking about, and the idea is, some of the questions you were asking was, how do I do this on a day-to-day basis? And that's exactly the right thing to ask. Resilience isn't about, well, I know I'm under a lot of stress, and in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to have a holiday, so it's all going to be okay. No, it's not going to be okay. How do you put strategies in on a day-to-day basis? Little things that can really help. And some of those strategies might be making sure you get enough sleep, practicing gratitude, thinking about what's the one or two things that you're really grateful for right now, which really helps our frame of mind. It helps to calm us down when we're feeling stressed. Mindfulness exercises, a lot of you asked about that. Breathing exercises, taking that breath when you feel something, or you see something, or you hear something that causes a reaction. Breathe, breathe, breathe. When we breathe, we can lower the temperature, we can get ourselves in a better state of calm, and then we can put coping strategies in place. Other strategies: journaling, healthy diet, exercise, connecting with friends, taking time for hobbies and interests. The number of people who say to me they stopped going to the gym. But if you know going to the gym helps you, find a way to get back to the gym. Okay, even if it's just once a week. So there are some coping strategies we can put in place. There are also maladaptive coping strategies, things we put in place that we know don't work. Isolation, violence, and that's not just physical. Violent speech, impatience, aggressive speech. There are some things that sometimes we might put in place: junk food, increase another glass of wine, that actually over time are really not going to work well for us. So we want to focus on this. We want to minimize these. There are some protective factors that is useful for us to consider: resources that we can put in place, financial resources, social resources, friends, family, networks. What resources do you have that help you when things are difficult? Who are the friends that you can reconnect with? Your own mindset, your own personality that can help you when you're under pressure. Perhaps you're good with people. Perhaps you are someone who's calm and optimistic. So how do you draw on the resources that you have to help you when things are challenging? Demographic are around, our education, our gender, our social status. What resources are available to you that, if you access those resources, would help you to be more resilient? The idea behind all of this is we're never looking to just cope. We're using this process, how we appraise the situation, how we put coping strategies in place, and the resources that we've got to enable us to thrive, not just cope. So those three things: appraisal, the strategies we put in place, and the resources, so that we can navigate these difficult times. Time is going really quickly, and I know we've only got sort of 5 or 10 minutes to go. So I just want to finish the presentation really by just flagging a few things to you about how we might demonstrate resilience to hiring managers. So hiring managers have got a lot more interested in this idea of resilience, because we know that resilient people might perform better, and performance is a differentiator for organizations. We know that there's a sweet spot. A little bit of pressure can help us perform. And we know that performance and resilience is important in achievement-oriented environments. So there's a lot more interest for people around this relationship between resilience and performance. So hiring managers, you might hear it talked about as a trait, a skill, or a mindset. Generally, what they're asking for is, can you face setbacks? Can you be adaptable, flexible, cope with change? Can you work under pressure? Can you solve problems? So we might want to be able to demonstrate this to hiring managers. So they'll want to know, how do you overcome failure? How do you react and respond, for example, in difficult, challenging environments? How do you cope with change? So what we want to be able to do is to share situations that are relevant to them. We want to give examples of coping strategies we've put in place, how we gather information, confirm priorities, agree expectations, set goals, agree deadlines. You might want to talk about the resources that you draw on to support you. So your own problem solving and communication skills, how you collaborate with others, how you develop your capability. You might want to talk about your own traits, your optimism, your curiosity, your calmness, and you might want to talk about what you've learned and put in practice afterwards. However, it's a two-way process. You want to know this is the right organization for you. So how is it that they're asking for resilience in the first place? Remember, the expectation shouldn't be that people develop the capability to manage prolonged stress. The expectation should be leaders reduce stress, organizations reduce stress. So you want to know what resources and support did they put in place? What leadership style would they demonstrate? What's the culture of the organization? How do procedures, processes, practices help staff? And what do they think is causing the most stress for staff at the moment? And how are they addressing that? I've covered a lot. I know I've covered a lot. The recording is going to be available for you after the event, so you can access that recording and work through some of these things. In particular, access the questionnaire, have a look at some of the resources that I've talked about. Please feel free to connect with me. I talked about a couple of courses on FutureLearn. One is free, and the links will go out to you on that. So I'm just going to stop sharing for the moment so that everyone can kind of see me. Um, as I say, I've covered a lot. I had hoped to be able to get to some questions, but I'm not going to be able to do that. But I just want to sum up some things for you to take away. First of all, remember it's a process. We can all develop our resilience. Think about what's the cause of the stress in the first place. It's always better to address things at a cause rather than we're in fight or flight, and it's really hard then to put strategies in place. What's the cause? What's about you, but what's about other people? And what's the support the organisation could put in place? Think about having good one-to-ones with your manager. Think about how you prioritize. Think about how you draw on the support of networks. So first of all, what's causing you stress in the first place? And then what are some of the things that you could put in place? And that could be coping strategies, things that on a day-to-day basis you can do that would really, really help. Phone a friend, go for a walk in nature, stroke the dog. Doesn't quite work if you've got a cat because sometimes they can be a bit, but stroke the dog. Yeah. Just those little things, go to the gym, the little things that you could put in place on a day-to-day basis that bring calm. When we're calmer, we've brought the temperature down, we're more able to cope. Think about the resources that you've got available to you to help. And then using those strategies, using those resources, how can you navigate these quite ongoing kind of turbulent situations? I saw lots of thank yous. It's been an absolute pleasure. Like I say, the recording will be available to you on jobs.ac.uk, so you can access that recording along with a load of great resources that they have to support you in your career journey. So thank you so much to everybody. Thank you so much for all the comments that are coming through to say thanks. It's been really good to see you, and I hope that that's been a useful session. It's given you some ideas to think about. Please go back to recording, try the questionnaire, and follow some of the links to resources that we send through.